Hey, TerraNova, thank you so much for being with us today online. I'm so excited about what we're talking about today. We are in the series finale of our series, Surthrival, and really looking forward to the content we'll be unpacking a little bit later. Before we get to that, we've got the band here with us today, and we are so grateful to you guys for what you've been bringing to our community over the past few weeks. I think I speak for all of us when I say thank you, not just for being here with us today, but for what you've been doing. And they're starting us off today with a song that I love. It's a song about the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. And what's fascinating about the very first Christians is when they talked about Jesus' resurrection, they didn't talk about it simply as something that happened once in history, though they believed it had happened literally and physically in history, but they actually saw it as something that happens again and again and again as people begin to follow Jesus, that God is a God who raises the dead, including the dead in us and things that feel like they've died in us and around us. And this song opens with a line that I just love. It starts out saying, "I was buried beneath my shame. Who could carry that kind of weight? It was my tomb till I met you. I was breathing, but not alive. All my failures, I tried to hide, tried to be somebody I wasn't, and that was my tomb till I met you. You called my name, and I ran out of that grave into your glorious day." And so let's sing that song together today with the band. Hey, if you have your TerraNova app, open up the worship lyrics so you can sing along with us. If you're following along on our watch page, the link is right there with it, right there as well. And let's sing together this amazing song of God's goodness and power in our lives. It's called Glorious Day.
I was buried beneath my shame. Who could carry that kind of weight? It was my tomb till I met you. I was breathing but not alive. And all my failures I tried to hide. It was my tomb till I met you. You called my name, and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. You called my name, and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. Your mercy has saved my soul. Now your freedom is all that I know. The old man knew Jesus when I met you. You called my name, and I ran out of the darkness into your glorious day. You called my name, and I ran was heavy, my chains break at the weight of your glory. I needed shelter, I was an orphan. Now you call me a citizen of heaven. When I was broken, you were my healing. Your love is the air that I'm breathing. I have a future, my eyes are open, 'cause when you called my name, I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness, into your glorious day. You called my name, and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness, into your glorious day. When everything is embers, then my heart remembers that you are here with me. In the middle of the storm, when everything gets scattered, my heart will not be shattered. You are here with me. Whenever I call out your name, your answer always is the same. There's truth that comes, sets me free. You are here with me. In the middle of the battle, this song will be my war cry, so my heart cannot deny. You are here with me. In the middle of the wilderness, surrounded by loneliness, where my soul God, we're so grateful that you're here with us in the middle of this storm that, God, we are facing right now as a city, as a country. God, as a world, we are desperately in need to know this truth, that you are here with us, God. That no matter what we're facing, you are here. God, you have not left us alone. You have not left us without weapons, God, without tools that can help us through this, God. To call on you, to be in your presence, to connect with you and with your words and with your thoughts, God. We gather each week to do that, to remind ourselves that we are not alone, that you are here with us, God, and that you've adopted us into your family. You've made us not slaves, but, God, sons and daughters. We're so thankful for that. We're so grateful for that. To live in freedom and not in fear because of you, because of what you've done for us. Let's sing this together. You unravel me with a melody, and you surround me with a song of deliverance from my enemies, till all my fears are gone. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. My mother's womb, you have chosen me. Love has called my name. I've been born again to your family. Your blood flows through my veins. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. And I'm no longer Now I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God.
What a powerful, powerful song. Hey, thank you so much for leading us in our worship. I want to welcome you to TerraNova Online, and thank you so much for joining us this weekend. My name is Scott, and we're going to have a great time together. As you're watching, we're going to be wrapping up our series, Surthrival, that we've been in the last few weeks. And so if you happen to have missed any of those messages, the best place to find those are by jumping on our YouTube channel. If you're on YouTube, you can search for Our TerraNova. That's just one word, and you'll find our channel. You can watch all the previous messages, as well as a bunch of other things on there, including our Lyle and Dana videos of them in the wilderness surthriving. Tons of fun. I know I've enjoyed those, as well as my kids, the last few weeks. So if you're watching on Facebook Live or on the TerraNova watch page right now, would you go ahead and say hi in the comment section, and then let everybody know which of those videos has been your personal favorite? Was it the first one where they were on foot, or maybe it was the one where they were on bikes, or how about the one where they were on Zoom, or even last week with them underwater, okay? So for me, it would be that first week, because that was the first time that I was introduced to Lyle's magnificent accent, right? As he's saying, look at those neighborhoods. What a gift that gives day after day for me. I bet you agree as well, right? Well, hey, as you're watching this weekend, be sure to spend some time filling out a Connect card. You can get to that on our app or on our website. But if there is anything that you're going through right now where you need some prayer, you need some support, or you just want to give us an update about something that's important to you right now, that is a great opportunity and a great vehicle to do that. We'd love to have everybody fill out a Connect card every single weekend. And if you're watching and this is like your first interaction, your first experience with TerraNova, I want to thank you for tuning in and for watching with us. We hope you have a great experience and find this really encouraging and helpful. And we love to encourage you to fill out one of those Connect cards too. That might be a great opportunity for you to ask any questions you have about who we are as a church community, or maybe there's something that you could use some prayer or encouragement with. Whatever the case, we'd love to invite everybody to fill out a Connect card right now. And speaking of connection, one of the things that we're going to be doing over the next season that's going to increase some connection within our community is rolling out some brand new life groups. In fact, we're going to be launching life group signups for these new groups this weekend. So if you go to the TerraNova app or on our website, you'll see these groups. We've got a bunch of different groups. We've got groups that are going to be meeting on Zoom, groups that are going to be doing some outdoor activities together, and we've also got some groups that are going to be meeting in person, obviously observing some social distancing requirements there as well. But if you are like me, one of the things that you've probably noticed with the people around you, or maybe even with yourself, is that in this season, one of the things that we're getting very little of is connection and community. And so one of the realizations that we have and the realities that we know is that we were made to live in community, and we were made for connection. And so at no time should we be withdrawing or isolating, but especially during a season like right now. And so I would invite you to find that group that's going to benefit you in your health as well as the people around you by being a blessing in their life. Well, hey, if you're part of the TerraNova community and you're in a place where you can give financially, I want to remind you that you've got the opportunity to do that. You can give on the TerraNova app or on our website, or also by mailing something in to the church offices either right now or at any point during the week. But one of the things that we've been saying week after week, in fact, I feel like a broken record in saying this, is just the gratitude that we have, not just for financial generosity, but by the way, TerraNovans week after week are just saying, hey, what can I do to put others' needs ahead of myself? What can I do to cultivate some compassion and some love and some generosity and some empathy? And that is something that man, we're not just excited about. We are proud of the way this community has lived out its faith. So thank you so much for following in the way of Jesus and for desiring to make God's love famous, not just in theory, but by the ways that you are giving and being generous during this time. All right, well, we are going to jump into the series finale of Surthrival, but not before we get one last look at Lyle and Dana in the wild. Let's check it out.
as we reach the exciting conclusion of our series Surthrival at TerraNova. Up to this point, it's been a wild ride. Outside, in our rugged local wilderness areas. And inside, navigating the ups and downs of cyberspace. And even in the depths of the neighbor's backyard pool. Such exploits might be leaving us weakened, fatigued, ready to give up in the midst of the crisis.
And then we reach this moment where it's critical that we get some deep rest. And there's nothing that does it better than being in the cozy confines of this two-person backpacker's tent.
Tent dwellings are ideal if you want to take things easy and get your batteries recharged. And while a bit tricky to set up, these lightweight tents do the job in sheltering you from the elements, while at the same time creating the ideal environment to do something really necessary. It's to pause and think things through.
So I've been thinking that this time of crisis is the perfect illustration of Murphy's Law. You've heard of Murphy's Law, have you? It's kind of like the law of gravity. You know the law of gravity, love?
Yes, what goes up must come down.
Yeah, so Murphy's Law is kind of like it. You know it.
Yes, what can go wrong will go wrong. Oh.
Required.
But before we do that, and
So here we have now. And then, oh, stop it. People often asking us. Let me try it again. Yep, summer is coming. I can never remember what I'm supposed to say. Well, thank goodness that that's all behind us. Even in a world where what can go wrong will go wrong, we can rest easy and recharge, just as we are doing today, as we've gathered together online and enjoyed some great music provided by the band. And now we get to enter into a time in the scriptures as Pastor John leads us. But before we close things out, thanks so much for joining us. And as they say in showbiz,
that's a wrap.
Hey, welcome again to the final episode of our series, Surthrival. I hope you've been enjoying this series half as much as I have. In fact, if you've gotten anything out of the series, if you've maybe gotten something that really stuck with you in some way, we'd love to know about that or just hear that. Either on your Connect card, fill that out. You can maybe tell us something you've gotten out of this series, or honestly, just in your comments section right now on whatever platform you're watching, you can share maybe a little bit of that with us. We'd love to hear that. But before we jump into where we're going, I want to set up what's going to happen next, over the next few weeks. In 4 weeks, we're kicking off a series on the ancient document as part of the Hebrew scriptures that we call the Old Testament, known as the book of Daniel. And the series is called Against the Flow. And in fact, many of our life groups are going to be discussing content from this series as well and from the book of Daniel. And as Scott was just telling you a second ago, man, please sign up for our life group over these next few weeks. Get connected in community this summer, and we're going to be discussing this just incredible content. But over the next 3 weeks, between now and then, we are going to take 3 weeks to talk about something that's all around us right now and within us: conflict. Hello. Yeah, conflict. In fact, we've been saying throughout this series that pressure has a way of bringing out of us what's in us. And sometimes that's really noble and good, and it brings out the best in us. And we've probably seen some of that over the last couple of months. But sometimes what it brings out is like not so good. Am I right? And in fact, during this season, maybe you've noticed there's just added anxiety and maybe some financial pressure, and then the uncertainty of everything we're going through. And of course, you're stuck in close quarters with people that, okay, you love them, but hey, absence makes the heart grow fonder, right? And now we have no absence, and we're just on top of each other, and you're trying to homeschool, and it just kind of puts us on edge. And then you add to that the fear of someone getting sick or the fear of getting someone sick, and it just reduces the kind of emotional margin that we have for each other. And then there's all the conflict that we have with people who don't see all of this the way we see it, and they're not taking it seriously enough, or they're taking it too seriously. And all of this, of course, has become so incredibly political. No surprise, we're in an election year that's so political, and blue state versus red state, and protests happening around our country. And the question becomes, how, as followers of Jesus, do we live lives of peace in a polarized world? How do we bring Jesus and the reconciliation and peace of Jesus into such a polarized context? And not just out there, it's in here. It's between us, it's between family and friends. And so we're kicking off this series next weekend called Fighting Amongst Ourselves. Fighting amongst ourselves, pursuing peace in a polarized world. And you need to be a part of this, and people you know need to be a part of this. So share this and join us next week as we kick off this new series. But today is the series finale of Surthrival, a series that's been about not just surviving, but thriving in the midst of crisis. And when our world comes crashing down, we often feel, or we often have thoughts like, I'll never be happy again. I mean, this is just, my life is over. Nothing good can come from this. There's no point in even continuing. There's no real, why even try? Nothing's working. Nothing's going to get better. And this series has actually been based on two assumptions. And the first assumption is actually that crises can become the context for our greatest growth and learning and transformation in life. Not, by the way, comfort or safety or security. We don't really grow that much when life is easy. It's the hardship, it's the affliction, it's conflict, it's adversity that pushes us, that potentially purifies us, that builds strength of character in us. And in fact, Professor Jonathan Haidt from New York University calls this the adversity hypothesis. And here's what he suggests. He suggests that people actually need adversity. We actually need adversity and setbacks and perhaps even trauma in order to reach the highest levels of strength and fulfillment and personal development. We can't even get there without adversity. And this, I think, is what James, the brother of Jesus, is getting at in some lines from a letter he wrote that have kind of formed the foundation of this series that we've been in, when he says, "Consider it pure joy, brothers and sisters, whenever, and you will often face trials of many kinds, because you know that it's actually the testing of your faith that builds resilience, that produces perseverance in you. So welcome it. Learn to welcome it because of the benefits it will produce in you, the strength of character that you will discover on the other side. But, we've been saying this throughout the series, not automatically. Not automatically, we have to let it. We have to let that process, that perseverance, finish its work so that we would be mature and complete. In other words, we've been saying, don't just pray to get through this. Pray to grow through this. Let God do in you through this what he wants to do in you. Now, I said there are two assumptions behind this series. The first is that crises create the context for growth. The second assumption is this. This isn't your last crisis. This isn't your last crisis, and it may not be your worst crisis, but there are things that we can learn in this crisis that we can carry into future adversity that will make us healthier and better and stronger and more mature and more complete versions of ourselves. And come on. Wouldn't you like to be that person? I mean, wouldn't you like to be that person that you could, I mean, you've met people like that, so stable and so sure and so courageous in the middle of things that are rocking their world. And wouldn't you like to be that person? Of course you would. And so as this series began 4 weeks ago, we started the series talking about letting that process happen in us. Letting that process happen. And by the way, if you've missed any part of this series, you can catch it on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Our TerraNova. We talked about this idea of a refiner's fire and what it brings to the surface in our lives and building strength and integrity. And then in week 2, we talked about how a crisis threatens our faith and threatens our view of God, and how essential it is, actually really essential to your brain and to your physiology, that you have a healthy view of God and of God's love and goodness. And then in part 3 of the series, we dove into Paul's letter to the Philippians, and we talked about joy and anxiety and what they both do to your brain and how essential it is to learn how to choose joy and take back joy so that you can be at your best in the middle of a crisis or adversity when you really need to be at your best. And then last week was really kind of a continuation of part 3 as we went back to that idea and talked really about our thought lives and how we need to learn how to argue with ourselves and argue with our own thoughts, that you should not believe every thought you ever have. And we need to become a whole lot more selective about the voices that we are listening to, both coming from outside of us and coming from inside of us. And so now today is the final episode. I want to talk about one more key, and some would actually say this is the key to thriving in the midst of crisis. And I want to take a look at something that the Apostle Paul, who wrote the letter we were talking about last week and the week before, the Apostle Paul wrote to Christians in the Greek city of Corinth. And what you need to know, here's the context, set a little bit of context. Something bad has happened to Paul in the city of Ephesus. And Paul has been living in Ephesus here in the Roman province of Asia for about 2 years, from about 53 AD to about 55 AD. And while he was there, as often was the case, pretty much wherever Paul went, he suffered, but he suffered something terribly, and we don't exactly know what happened to him there. In fact, Luke, who is a historian, told the history of the growth of the Jesus movement throughout the Mediterranean region. He tells us some of the things that happened to Paul, but he doesn't tell us all of those things. In fact, at the very end of the letter we're looking at today, Paul gives a list of the things that he's gone through over the past handful of years, and oh my goodness, it is far more exhaustive than the scenarios that Luke describes. He's been through so much, and we don't know exactly what happened in Ephesus, but we know it was bad. And we know it was so bad. It was so bad that this man, Paul, who has been through hell so many times with the most resilient attitude imaginable, writes this: we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about the afflictions, the suffering, the trial. That word could actually be even translated oppression that we experienced in the province of Asia, which is where Ephesus is. We were unbearably crushed. We were unbearably crushed, far beyond our ability to endure it. I mean, so much for the whole saying, God will never give you more than you can bear, and other things that are never said in the Bible. He says, are you kidding me? This was far beyond our ability to bear it or endure it, so that we, get this, despaired of life. We despaired of life itself. Indeed, we felt like we had received, and literally says we had received within ourselves the sentence of death, which by which he clearly means not just we thought we might die physically. Paul had faced death many times, unflinchingly. He was not afraid to die. But this was different. This was a feeling inside them like that they had died, that something within them had died on the inside. Despaired of life, felt the sentence of death. You ever feel that way? You ever feel like something's just died in you or in your life? You're grieving a death. I've often thought to myself that we're not very good at grieving, I don't think, as Americans, which might sound weird to you, like good at grieving. Do I even want to be good at grieving? I don't know that I want to be good at grieving. And at least when there's actually a physical death, when someone we love actually passes, we kind of know we're supposed to be grieving. But there are many other kinds of deaths, many other deaths and many other losses that we experience over the course of a lifetime. Some of us have experienced a divorce, either the divorce of our parents or our own divorce, or maybe both, or maybe more than that. And every divorce represents a death. It's the death of a future and dreams and what you thought your family might be and your hopes and expectations. And there is something to be grieved there. We've lost jobs or career paths. And again, it wasn't just the loss of the job or career or the feeling of rejection or something or the injustice of it. It was the death of your future, of all that you thought or hoped or expected things to be. And of course, during this season, we are all experiencing death upon death upon death, many losses of what we had expected or what we imagined or how we thought this particular part of our future might go. And then there's the cascading effect of it all. Am I right? Because you've had this, I've had this, where it's like, and there goes another thing. And there goes another thing. There's another thing that'll never happen. There's another thing I was hoping for and I dreamt of, and apparently that's not going to happen either. And we have all experienced loss and death inside ourselves. You probably heard of something called the 5 stages of grief. It's based on the work of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who wrote the book on grief and grieving. And the 5 stages of grief, according to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then finally, acceptance. And the idea is that people kind of progress through these stages, if you will, of grief, not linearly necessarily, and not strictly speaking, but there's this process to grief. Now, what's interesting, I don't know if you know this, Dr. Ross actually didn't write that for stages of grief per se. She was a medical doctor and a psychiatrist in a hospital working specifically with patients who were suffering terminal illnesses. And she had initially came up with these 5 stages as the process that these patients went through after receiving their diagnosis. And it kind of makes a lot of sense when you see it through that lens, doesn't it? And yet there have been many who work in the world of grief who've noticed that there are parallels to how we process losses in our lives too. It was about 2 weeks into this whole experience that I realized I was grieving. I mean, I was emoting all over the place. I was so angry and I was so frustrated, and I'd come home after a day's work and I'm just emoting, and my wife would say, like, what's wrong with you? And I couldn't really say, and I've learned over the years, when negative emotions come to the surface, they have a tendency to attach to whatever's in front of them, whether they belong there or not. And so sometimes it's just better not to start speculating on what's going on. And I just knew that I had a lot of emotion that was not positive. And then I realized I'm grieving. Denial, like, this cannot be happening. You are kidding me. There's no way this is happening. Anger, lots of anger. Bargaining, we'll figure our way around this. Certainly there's some things we can do. This isn't going to happen. We'll get through this. Depression. I mean, I had all of this emotion, and just realizing I was grieving, having that category to put it in that made sense of it all. I was like, oh yeah, I'm so glad I didn't spill that out on other people unwittingly. Maybe you've been grieving too. In fact, I would suggest that probably most, if not all of us, have been, and not perhaps even realize it. Now, comparing losses to other people is always a bad idea, whether I'm diminishing my own losses because they shouldn't seem such a big deal, or I'm diminishing someone else's loss like you think that was bad. That's always a bad idea. A loss is a loss, and all loss demands grief. That said, I wouldn't begin to compare my loss with Paul's suffering. He can have his suffering. I'll take my loss any day of the week. It's on such a greater scale that Paul writes, we feel like we had died. We were unbearably crushed beyond our ability to do it. We despaired of life. It's hard to even imagine someone like the Apostle Paul saying, we had lost all hope. We despaired of life. And so it's not to be taken lightly that as Paul writes this letter, he's now left Ephesus, he survived whatever happened. He's traveled by land from Ephesus through Troas and then up and around the Aegean Sea by land to Macedonia when he writes this letter to Corinth, and he begins his letter this way: praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus, the Messiah. Praise be to him. To which we go, hey, wait, Paul, time out. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Like, you're praising God right now? Why? Paul, how can you believe in a good God when you've experienced so much pain? And Paul says, no. Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. And then he adds this line: the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort. And the word compassion, that word compassion implies a deep concern or an active sympathy for someone. It's not just feeling with them, it's acting upon that feeling. It's like God not only feels with what you're going through, he's active in it with you. In fact, Paul says he is the God of all comfort. And the Greek word we translate comfort is the word paraklesis. The verb is parakaleo, paraklesis. And paraklesis is so much more than comfort. It's not like this Hallmark card thing, pat on the head, buck up, silver lining, make lemonade. That is not what paraklesis is about. Paraklesis carries this sense of coming alongside someone. being with someone in this and bringing or imparting to them courage. And I love that word, or encourage. To encourage literally means to put encourage into someone, to put courage into them, put hope into them, put strength, put refreshment in them. The God of all comfort who comes alongside of us and who has brought strength and courage back into our lives, who comforts us in all our afflictions. Now, can I be honest? We don't really want God to comfort us in affliction, do we? We want God to what? Remove the affliction. That's what we want, am I right? And listen, there is nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. Praying for a miracle, praying to get out of what you're in, to be delivered from evil, that is a great way to pray. But Paul knows that some afflictions won't be removed, and that you are going to walk through some things, some pain in this life that's just going to be a part of you. And Paul says, we despaired of life. We were unbearably crushed. We were grieving death inside ourselves. And in that dark place, we received comfort. We received strength and courage and new life from God so that what? So that what, Paul? Well, so that we will be comforted, right? Right? I mean, so that we will feel better. Isn't that the point? Isn't that the point of being comforted? So that now we feel better? And Paul says, there's a so that. There's a so that. There is a reason, there is a purpose, there is a result that I have come to recognize. So that, he says, we can. So that and that word can carries the sense of so that we now have the ability to do something. We now have the power to do something. We now have the ability to comfort others in any affliction through the comfort that we ourselves have received from God, the God of all comfort. And here's what you know. In fact, we all know this. We've all experienced this. There is a natural affinity between people who've suffered similarly. Isn't that true? There's this natural affinity to people who've suffered together or who have suffered similarly, and the rest of us can try, and we might have the best intentions, and we try to be good friends, or we try to be good kids, or good spouses, or good parents, and we try to support or offer our support. But when somebody walks into the room who's been there, who suffered in that same way, there's just this natural affinity between those who have suffered similarly. And because of that, people who have suffered uniquely are uniquely qualified to comfort those who are suffering. People who have suffered uniquely are uniquely qualified, that the comfort from those who have been comforted, comfort that comes from those who have been comforted, who've been in that dark valley, and they found hope, and they found life, and they found refreshment again and strength again. Comfort from those who have been comforted is life-giving to those who need comfort. And Paul is saying, this is actually part of the purpose or the meaning that we have found to our suffering, that God comforts us to comfort others, that God strengthens us to strengthen others. God puts courage in us so that we can put courage in others. God grows us and he matures us and he completes us so that we can reach our hand back to the person or to the group of people who are behind us going through that same impasse, and we can help them through it, that we can pour out into others what God has poured into us so that. And the question we often ask when we are in the middle of it is why? Why? Why is this happening to me? God, why is this happening, and why are you allowing this to happen to me? And Paul would say that part of the answer, not all of the answer, there's more to it. In fact, we're going to get to a little bit more of it in a second. That part of the answer is so that you can pass on to the next person what's been passed on to you, because in this world, this fallen world where there is so much evil and adversity and hardship and loss and injustice, and someday God will come. We're told, Paul believed this. He will restore it all. But until that day, it is the wounded who make the best healers. There's a so that. David Kessler actually co-authored with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross the book on grief. And in a recent interview with Harvard Business Review, an article called That Discomfort You're Feeling is Grief. I highly recommend the article. Look it up as soon as we're done here and read it. But he tells in this article, in this interview, of how the family of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross gave him permission to add a sixth stage to grief. And the sixth stage of grief, according to David Kessler, is meaning. It's meaning. And he says, this is what comes after acceptance. In fact, he says, I didn't want to just stop at acceptance. I didn't just want to stop there. I wanted meaning. I wanted to find meaning after acceptance. Viktor Frankl is a Holocaust survivor and a renowned psychologist from a bygone era. And he quite literally wrote the book on meaning. And he says this is so powerful. In some way, he says, and he would know, in some way, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. Suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. It's part of the healing. It's part of the healing, and it is an essential part of thriving as we begin to give away what we ourselves have received, the comfort, the courage that we ourselves have received. We actually find more life and more strength and more courage ourselves. Paul says there is a so that in the journey that you are going through, that we have gone through together. And then Paul gets theological on us. He gets all theological. And in the next few words, we get this window into how he sees Jesus, into how he sees life, into how he sees his own life and his own suffering. And he says this next. He says, for just as we, and it's talking about we, he's talking about he, and his friends and this team that have been through so much. He says, as we share abundantly in the sufferings of Christ or the Messiah. And here's why this is so powerful. Because as a young rabbinical scholar in Jerusalem, Paul had heard of this Jesus, this rabbi from Nazareth who had been sentenced to and then to death and crucified by the Romans. In fact, Paul's own mentor, Gamaliel, who was one of the leading rabbis of the first century in Jerusalem, had a hand in sentencing Jesus and seeing to his death. And there's no doubt that Paul approved wholeheartedly. This rabbi from Nazareth, he was to be despised, he was to be shamed, he was to be hated. But then this rabbi's students, his disciples, began to call him Messiah, began to call him, the Greek word for Messiah is Christ, their long-awaited deliverer. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? See, the Messiah that Paul had waited for all of his life, the Messiah that the rabbis that Paul knew and learned with were waiting for, the Messiah doesn't suffer, he conquers. He's not crucified by the Romans. He crucifies the Romans. And Paul hated these Jesus followers. They weren't just dumb. They were dangerous. And he hated them so much that he sought to exterminate them, literally to hunt them down, arrest them, and even kill them. And then Paul has an experience with the risen Jesus. Now, you may struggle with the idea of, did Jesus actually historically, literally rise from the dead? I understand the struggle, but you'd need to talk to Paul about that and hear his story, because historically speaking, he changed completely. He has an experience that completely changed his life and changed his understanding of life and his understanding of suffering. And he came to the radically opposite conclusion, informed in part by the ancient prophet Isaiah 52 and 53, that the Messiah actually had to suffer. He actually had to suffer horribly under the weight of all that crushes us, and that in fact Paul came to see that it was his suffering that was his greatest glory, and it was his moment of greatest suffering that was his moment of greatest glory and triumph. And Paul came to see the suffering of the Messiah in a completely different way, and with that for Paul came a corollary, like a twin realization, that to live with the Messiah, to walk with the Messiah, to be the people of the Messiah, to serve with the Messiah, the suffering servant who had suffered under the weight of all of the world's evil, to serve alongside that Messiah would mean suffering at times, the same suffering, under the same weight of the same world's evil that the Messiah himself had suffered, and like the Messiah, to be the redemptive presence of God in the middle of evil and affliction and injustice. And Paul says, just as the sufferings of the Messiah have landed on us, just as they landed on us, so also the comfort of the Messiah abounds through Christ. Abounds, he says. It abounds. In other words, it's like too much. It's just too much. As it's poured into me, it's overflowing from me. And the idea is that it abounds for others. Like it's just too much for me. It's not just for me, it's for others. And here's just kind of making a practical point out of this. Our capacity to comfort is so often determined by the degree of our own sufferings. Isn't that true? Our capacity to comfort, our capacity to give strength and hope to someone who's in a dark place is determined by our own experience of receiving and finding strength and hope in a dark place of our own. In fact, that idea forms the foundation of organizations like Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12-step groups and recovery groups or support groups, that our capacity to comfort others is really determined by our own experience of that suffering. And Paul says, as you receive courage, as we receive courage, as you receive grace and strength and insight in your struggle, it's not actually just for you. It's for others. It's for others. And so he says, and so he adds this idea, and so if we are afflicted, if we're going through it, it's actually for you. It's actually for you, for your strength and salvation. As we go through trials and crises, it's actually for you, it's actually for others, so that we can bring something better, and we can bring something more healthy and more helpful to you. And by the same token, he says, and by the way, not just afflicted, if we're comforted, that too is for you, so that we can stand before you. We can come alongside you and say, don't give up. Don't give up. It's not over, friends. I've been in that same place before. There is life on the other side of it. It's not over for you. That what I've experienced, in other words, here's what he's saying. Bad or good, it's not about us. Isn't that amazing? It's not about us, he's saying. It's never about us. The bad things that happen to us, the good things that happen to us, they are never about us. And of course, nothing turns our world inside upon ourselves than pain and hardship and suffering and trauma. Nothing makes us more myopic and short-sighted and inward focused as suffering does. And Paul just says, I refuse to let that happen. I refuse to let that happen. Like the Messiah, whose suffering was instrumental. It was for the good of others. So too, we choose to see our suffering and affliction and comfort as instrumental. It's actually for you. It's so we can bring to others something that's for their benefit or for their good. See, there are those who go through life just fixated on everything that's happened to them. It's the victim mindset. And the victim mindset says, life is really all about what's happened to me. This is all about what happens to me, and my life is the result of everything that happened to me, things I can't control, and things I didn't choose, and things I can't change. You think I wanted this? I don't want to be in this position. I don't want to be here right now, but I can't help it because life is about what happens to me, and that's why I am what I am. That's why I am who I am, and that's why I am where I am, because of what happened to me. But Paul's mindset, and you might say the victor mindset, you might even say the meaning mindset, is that life is what happens through me. Life is not about what happens to me, it's about what happens through me. And I think Paul would say, yeah, James was right, and Paul knew James. They probably had conversations about this because they write similar things in letters that they write. The trial, the testing does make you stronger. It does. It builds resilience if you let it. If we let it, it makes us more mature, a more complete version of ourselves. That's really true, but that's not where the process ends. That's not where the process ends. The process doesn't end until you give it away, until something happens through you for the benefit of another person, until you take your hardship and your struggle and your trauma and you actually turn it into good for others. In fact, some of the most beautiful, most helpful, most redemptive, most noble things ever done in human history were done by people who were turning their hardship into good for others. I've seen people go through the foster care system who decided to make it part of their own life mission, to make life better for kids who are being raised without their birth parents. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, Alcoholics Anonymous and 12-step programs were created by people and for people who were turning their addiction and their disease and their comfort and the insights that they gained through that into healing for other people. I've seen women rescued from sex trafficking who then decided they were going to make it a part of their life's mission to rescue other young ladies from that same thing and to fight for an end of that horrible evil in our world. I've seen couples survive affairs and this dark, dark tunnel where it doesn't seem like there is a light at the end of it all, and they came out the other side of it, and they said to me personally, if we can help anyone else, don't hesitate to ask. And yes, that was dark and that was so shameful. I wouldn't wish it upon my worst enemy. But we aren't going to keep it in the dark if it can bring light to someone else. The same Paul that wrote the letter we've been looking at, the letter that he wrote to the Corinthians, a number of years later, about 3 or 4 years later, he writes a letter back to the city of Ephesus where whatever terrible thing had happened to him. And he writes in this letter a line that I had heard and read, in fact, even memorized and kind of recounted so many times. And I'd always thought about it one way until I heard it in a different way. And the line is going like this, that God shines light into the dark areas of our lives. In fact, we even sing a song about that around here, that God has a way of shining or bringing light into the shadows, into those dark places in our lives. And I had always understood that to say that he's doing it to reveal like what's hidden, to bring that out into the open, to bring truth and redemption as he brings it to light. And I think that's true. I think that's part of it. But that's not exactly what Paul writes. In fact, what he writes is so much more powerful than that. And here's what he writes in this letter to Ephesus. He says, everything exposed by the light becomes visible. And I think that's the first part of it. Like things are brought out in the truth and brought out in the light. And okay, that's true. And then he adds this insight. He says, and everything that is illuminated becomes a light. Did you catch that? Did you catch that? Those things that were hidden in the dark, those things we had tucked away in the shadows that we were so ashamed of, that we wanted no one to know about, when God brings those things into the light and they become illuminated, they actually become a light. In other words, those things become something that gives light to other people who now are in that same darkness and need some light in their lives. And friends, this is what God does. This is what God does all the time if we let him. If we let him, if we decide my life is not going to be about what happens to me. My life is going to be about what happens through me. My life is no longer going to be limited by the things that happen to me. My life is going to become about the things that can happen through me. I'm not going to bury my sorrows. I'm not going to waste my sorrows. I'm not going to deny my sorrows or pretend that they never happened. I am going to leverage my sorrows and leverage my crises and leverage my adversities and afflictions for the sake of other people. My life will not be about what happened to me. My life is going to be about what happens through me. And I'm not just going to drift. I'm not just going to drift. And there's so many people who are drifting right now. I just see it all around me. They're just drifting. They're just surviving. They're just kind of getting through it because it keeps getting prolonged and who knows when it'll end. And when we get on the other side, we'll pick things back up again, and they're just drifting. And there are some of us who will say, I'm not just going to drift through this season. What would it be like? What would it look like for a community of people to see our lives and, in fact, see these circumstances and this crisis through such a different lens? And we began to say, I don't want to just get through this. I want to grow through this. I want to grow through this. God, I want to grow through this. I want to be more mature, more complete, healthier, closer to God, closer to others on the other side of this. I want to grow through this, but I don't want to stop there. I don't want to stop just there, more comforted, and now I'm healthier, and like I'm this better person. I don't want to just stop there. I want to then take what God has poured into my life, and for the rest of my life, I want to pour that out for others. I want to make my life about what happens through me. What would it look like over the course of these next few weeks or months in our current situation to be a community that sees our lives through that lens. But of course, to do that in this season and the season that's starting to unfold, how polarized everybody is, how much conflict there is, to do that, to be those kinds of people in this season, we are going to have to come face to face with some challenges that we need to deal with. Please, please, please do not miss next week as we kick off our brand new series, Fighting Amongst Ourselves. Let's close in prayer. Heavenly Father, as I talk about this, I'm just so aware that it hits all of us in such different places. What we've lost, what we've suffered, what we've grieved through, how we've processed it up till now, the stories we have in our heads. I know that it sits us all in very different places, and so I just pray that you would give us all to hear, the ears to hear what we needed to hear today, and the wisdom from you to know what to do with it, the grace and the strength we need to take just the next step in front of us, to begin to see our lives and our adversity just a little bit different. And as we do, I pray that your Spirit, that you, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, would pour into us the strength and courage and life and light and refreshment that we need so that we can pour it out to the people around us. And I pray that in Jesus' name, amen. Well, hey, before you go away real quick, would you take a second and just let us know how you're doing? Fill out that Connect card. And by the way, if you're new, if you just started watching us over this week or the past few weeks, we'd love to hear from you as well. There's a new here button that you could click or a link that you can get to on Facebook and on our watch page. We would love to hear from you and just let us know that you're watching or who you are and if there's any way we can serve you or love you or pray for you as well. And of course, if you're part of the TerraNova family, again, we just been saying this every week, the generosity is blowing our minds, and we've been able to be very, very generous to people around. I just got a letter yesterday in the mail from somebody who just could not believe what we were able to do for them and some people that they were loving and serving on. So thank you so much for your generosity. You can give, of course, on the TerraNova app, very easy to do. On our website, very easy to do. Or, of course, you can mail in a check or drop it by our offices anytime. Listen, God bless you guys. May you live in the comfort of God, your heavenly Father, and I hope that you'll join us next week and invite a few people with you as we kick off our new series. It's going to be good, Fighting Amongst Ourselves. God bless you. See you next weekend.